The crazy thing is the Japanese predicted they could lose multiple aircraft carriers at Midway and just decided to ignore it. This happened at war games they held May 1st through May 5th on the super battleship Yamato, and I've read it described as scripted silliness. I've read it described Nagasawa Ko, who was an officer who was there. He said the vibe of the whole thing was, quote, "This is a necessary drill, but don't worry, we'll take care of anything that comes along." Like the whole thing was a sham. And a lot of these officers were not down with the Midway operation. Nagumo, who was going to be in charge of the aircraft carriers, he was not down, but he was not in the favor of the Imperial Japanese Navy staff at that point in time because of his perceived lack of aggressiveness at Pearl Harbor. And he said at like a later social event, he said, "I would rather go to Midway and die than be branded as a coward." So he said nothing throughout this. It was ran by the chief of staff of Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy. His chief of staff, Yugaki Matome, he was the judge. And Yamamoto like threatened to resign if this operation didn't go down. He didn't care. He just wanted this to go his way. War games, the point of them is to poke holes in your plan because the Japanese were the red team and the Americans were the blue team. And interestingly enough, when the Americans would war game, they'd be the blue team and the Japanese would be the red team, which makes more sense to me because the whole Japanese branding is red. But I guess nobody wanted to be the red team. That's besides the point. But when anything bad would happen in these war games, Yugaki would be like, "Nope. That's nonsense. That couldn't happen." At one point in time, they rolled the dice and a strike from the Midway planes hit 3 Japanese aircraft carriers. He was like, "No, they only hit 1, actually. It's unrealistic that they would hit 3. At another point in time, the guy in charge of the red team, he popped up the American carriers where they weren't expected earlier than expected, very close to where they ended up and about the same time where they ended up. And Yugaki was like, "No. Never in a million years could that possibly happen," which is exactly what happened. A lot of the Japanese officers, they didn't even have their briefing documents until like very close to this, so they didn't understand the intricacies of this plan to begin with. And some people think that's by design because Yamamoto didn't want them to understand that there were potentially flaws in it. He didn't want to hear about any of these flaws. And so nothing good came out of this except for the fact that Yamamoto told Nagumo to keep half of his aircraft in reserve, which makes no sense, granted the tactical operation he handed him to keep half of his aircraft just cooling their heels while this was all going on. And I think my favorite thing that came out of it is that somebody asked Gendo Minoru, who's like one of the top tactical air minds in the Japanese Navy, what would happen? Let's get crazy. What would happen if the American aircraft carriers popped up where we didn't expect them? And I like how they put it in Shattered Sword, where they were like, internally, he probably was like, well, we're screwed then. But what he said is one touch of the armored gauntlet. Essentially, like, we'll just wipe them out. And so the Japanese didn't change the plan, and they lost 4 aircraft carriers at Midway.